As U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin met in Alaska to discuss prospects for a lasting peace in Ukraine, the international attention remained fixed on Gaza, where Israel's offensive has entered its 22nd month. In this special coverage, Qnews tracks the delicate diplomacy between Washington and Moscow, while also examining Egypt's leading role in delivering humanitarian aid to Gaza and the mounting international pressure to halt the violence. U.S. President Donald Trump said that a lasting peace between Russia and Ukraine requires a direct agreement, not just temporary ceasefire. Trump highlighted that European leaders share the view that a comprehensive deal is essential to end the conflict. He noted that during the Alaska summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin, discussions focused on key issues, including security guarantees and territorial arrangements. Trump stressed that a sustainable peace can only come from mutual agreement between Kiev and Moscow. Russian President Vladimir Putin broke protocol during his Alaska visit by riding with U.S. President Donald Trump in the presidential limousine. The unusual move came right after a joint photo session at the bilateral summit. Putin accepted Trump's personal invitation to ride alongside him in the Cadillac one known as the Beast, the armored presidential vehicle. Analysts said that the gesture reflects an unprecedented moment in U.S.-Russian diplomacy, highlighting the unusual dynamics of the summit in Alaska. European leaders said that they remain committed to pressuring Russia with sanctions following the Alaska summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. In a joint statement, the European leaders emphasized the need to maintain and strengthen sanctions and targeted measures against Russia. They also acknowledged President Trump's role in pursuing a potential end to the war in Ukraine, highlighting ongoing diplomatic efforts to resolve the conflict. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev said that Russian President Vladimir Putin presented Russia's conditions for ending the war in Ukraine during his meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump in Alaska. Medvedev said that the summit between the American and Russian presidents demonstrates the military operations and diplomatic efforts can coexist to bring the war in Ukraine to an end. He added that a full communication mechanism at the highest level has been established quietly and without ultimatums, praising Friday's summit and describing it as a success for Russia. French President Emmanuel Macron stated that it is essential to continue supporting Ukraine and maintaining pressure on Russia. Macron warned of what he described as Russia's tendency to fail in honoring its commitments regarding Ukraine.
Italienne, nos autres collègues européens et avec la présidente de la Commission pour...
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer stated that U.S. President Donald Trump's efforts have brought the world closer than ever to ending the war between Russia and Ukraine. In remarks reported by Reuters, Starmer noted that the next step should be to hold further talks involving Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
The plans we've put forward, credible military plans, and alongside that, the backing of
And for further analysis, we're joined from Moscow by Mr. Asif Molhe. writer, political researcher. Welcome to Qnews, sir. Now, how realistic is President Trump's call for a direct peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, given, of course, the current military and political landscape?
Good afternoon to you and to your dear viewers. According to my estimations, in reaching a comprehensive, just and sustainable pace, I think that will need more time. The Alaska summit of Putin and Trump cannot end all the causes of the conflict, as it is a very complicated conflict, technically speaking. Even the ceasefire in the front is in a very complicated with respect to the follow-up and implementation. So we cannot hold the summit that it is just a springboard. Before Ukraine is in a very difficult event, is trying to prolong in the war, more casualties in the Ukrainian army. In addition to the great losses of the Ukrainian assets, so there is no more options before the Ukraine to the. In fact, everyone is exhausted. Ukraine and Russia, along with Europe and United States, and has fears of the influence of the new allies between Russia and China within BRICS. That would threaten the domination of the dollar and the financial institutions in the United States. This was warned by the United States by saying, approaching with Russia, that would dismantle the alliance between Russia and China. The Alaska summit formally is a good step, but according to the leaks, there are no more leaks about the details of the summit, as it was a very in-camera meeting.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of security guarantees and territorial arrangements are likely being discussed in such talks?
With respect to the security guarantees, in fact, there is no clear formula as such. The problem is what happened. European countries, along with US, have agreed to provide security guarantees participated by the United States. Through such announcement did not include any such security guarantees, and said also the guarantees aren't going to be provided by the NATO. Russia considers the presence of any troops affiliated to Ukraine is a red line for it. In the future, how for the guarantees would be look like, nobody knows. There are no formulas as proposed deploying troops, fast interference by Poland. Anyway, we have to wait and see the amount of devastation in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. So how significant was Putin's symbolic ride with Trump in the so-called the Beast, and what does it reveal about U.S.-Russia relations now?
With respect to having Putin and Trump in the same vehicle, as they send in a message to the whole world, as they are the all capable leaders to laying out the features of the new order and determining the power influence. There are several powers in the conflict of the world order, such as China, India, Russia, European Union, and the US. Therefore, as if it is a signal to the rest of the whole world that the biggest nuclear powers are the ones to determine, if I may say, the features of the new world order. No one knows how it is going to look like and how it is going to be crystallized, but I think it is the only message I think about it to the whole world.
Mr. Mulhim, do you believe European sanctions on Russia are still an effective tool, or have they reached their limits now?
With respect to the sanctions in general, there is a general calculations with this regard. It's in fact very limited. Russia's been sanctioned before, along with each package is looking for a come out and has been successfully to do such a thing. According to my estimation, for the sanction cannot be having a strong and direct sanctions with Russia, as Russia reshaped its ties with the whole world. So we cannot be limited or contained by Russia unless if the whole world is going to punish or have sanctions against Russia.
How might European leaders balance continued support for Ukraine with Trump's push for direct negotiations?
With respect to the European continent, up to this moment is very much insisted to prolong the war. They think that Russia would attack some other European countries after Ukraine. I think there is no intention for Russia to attack any other European countries unless if a country made some activities within its borders. So Europe is very enthusiastic for the war without any advanced and American support. Otherwise, Europe cannot support Ukraine for good, and it is a pressure for the EU is to use pressure in Ukraine to force it to resort to the negotiation table or to listen to the saying that this war should come to an end by all means.
What role should President Zelensky play in these future talks? How could Ukraine ensure that it is not sidelined in a U.S.-Russia-led framework? Should Zelensky now be part of these negotiations or just depend on President Trump in this regard?
I think, according to my estimation, the U.S. is going to pressure Zelensky forcibly to accept the proposals. So ultimately, Ukraine should be represented. The whole thing goes on the territories of Ukraine. Russia and U.S. are present, but the other powers, particularly the EU countries, and whoever is going to represent Ukraine, so the negotiations aren't going to succeed on the table. Even filling the post in Ukraine to Mr. Shuker, the Parliament Speaker, can represent Ukraine in an international arena, but I think in the future we will see the representation of Ukraine as in such negotiations, and this cannot be happened but with the presence of Ukraine or whoever is going to represent the Ukrainian people.
Well, from Moscow, that was Mr. Asif Mulhim, writer, political researcher. Thank you so much for joining us here on Qnews. And now we move to the latest developments in Gaza. Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdel held a phone call with UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy, discussing ways to strengthen bilateral relations and ongoing efforts to secure a ceasefire and humanitarian aid access to Gaza. Both ministers stressed international pressure to halt Israeli violence and secure aid access to Gaza. They also discussed possible Palestinian state recognition at the UN General Assembly, citing the 1967 borders and East Jerusalem as its capital. Abdel highlighted the need to counter Israel's violations of international law and outlined plans for an early recovery and reconstruction conference with the Palestinian government and UN once a ceasefire is achieved. Secretary Lammy praised Egypt's role in facilitating aid and regional stability. Aerial footage showed widespread destruction in Gaza as international aid drops continue amid Israel's 22-month offensive. Turkish broadcaster TRT released video from planes delivering aid over Gaza, revealing the devastation across the territory. Countries including Egypt, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates and Canada are sending supplies, but aid agencies say that only a fraction reaches the civilians. Israel denies restricting aid despite global criticism and mounting humanitarian concerns. Egypt's armed forces released a detailed account of the country's humanitarian operations for Gaza, highlighting the extensive aid delivered and the obstacles posed by Israeli restrictions since the closure of the Rafah crossing.
Egypt's armed forces have detailed the country's ongoing humanitarian effort for Gaza, underscoring the scale of assistance provided despite severe Israeli restrictions. According to the statement, El Arish Airport has so far received 1,022 aid flights, carrying more than 27,247 tons of relief supplies, while El Arish Port has handled 32 ships, delivering approximately 74,779 tons. These shipments are transferred by truck to Gaza, either via the Rafah crossing, when operational, or through Karm Abu Salim, with all cargo subject to lengthy Israeli inspections lasting up to 24 hours. The military noted that Israel's control and destruction of the Palestinian side of Rafah since May 7th of 2024 has halted aid truck entries through the key crossing, forcing greater reliance on airdrops and Karm Abu Salim. Despite these constraints, Egypt has managed to deliver over 70% of all aid entering Gaza to date. This includes more than 45,125 trucks carrying in excess of 500,000 tons of medical and food supplies, 368,000 tons from Egypt and 132,000 from other nations, along with 209 ambulances, 81,380 tons of fuel, and 168 airdrops totaling 3,730 tons. More than 18,500 wounded Palestinians have also been treated in Egyptian hospitals. From July 27 to August 4th, 1,341 trucks entered Gaza through Karm Abu Salim, while over 5,000 remain in Egypt awaiting access. In the same period, 25 airdrops delivered 24 tons of aid as Rafah stays closed. The armed forces reaffirmed Egypt's steadfast support for Gaza and the Palestinian cause, despite the challenges of delivering humanitarian relief under current conditions.
An Israeli reconnaissance drone crashed this morning, Saturday, in the Rimal neighborhood of Gaza City during an operational mission by the Israeli occupation forces due to a technical malfunction. The Hebrew language channel confirmed that the drone was of the Skylark 3 model, manufactured by the Israeli company, and it is typically used for reconnaissance missions and intelligence gathering. Medical sources in the Gaza Strip have reported that the death toll from the famine caused by the starvation policy enforced by the Israeli occupation forces has risen to 251, including 108 children. The sources added that Gaza hospitals recorded 11 deaths within the past 24 hours, including one child due to malnutrition. For further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by managing editor of Al Ahram newspaper, Mr. Mohammed Azzeddin. Welcome to Qnews, sir. Now, how effective have Egypt's humanitarian efforts been in alleviating the crisis in Gaza under the current restrictions by the Israeli government?
Thanks for having me in Qnews. Absolutely, Egypt is exerting relentless effort that was manifested throughout the past few days. The direct Egyptian pressure, I do not wish to say away of the effort of mediation, but direct communications on the high level forced the Israeli occupation site in the effort of the international institutions up again or on the far-right coalition in Israel to deliver the humanitarian aid on land as Egypt's proposals hailed by the international institution. Also, it is the only sole effective role on the ground, despite the difficulties faced by the vehicles and the obstacles that aren't justified by the occupation forces in the Palestinian occupation territories. Egypt has exerted all the effort since the first moment. There were schemes to cease fire and to pose a state of peace and to release the Palestinian prisoners and to release the captives. Most importantly, to secure the access of the humanitarian and medical aids into the Gaza Strip. Unfortunately, Israel breached the truce despite Egypt's effort, along with Qatar and the US, never executed the second phase. Upon the return of the military actions, along with the machinery of killing against the civilian in Palestine and using the starvation weapon, Egypt exerted or made international effort and exposed the real pictures on what's happening on the ground in Gaza. And then the EU international community have moved strongly along with the international humanitarian agency by rejecting the GHF as they failed to distribute the aid, despite the obstacles exerted by the Israel. But it largely contributed to alleviate the pains of the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip and to contribute to deliver some of the fuel materials along with the medical aid to Palestine and to be handed over to the working institutions on the ground.
Sir, what alternative strategies are being used to ensure that aid reaches the Gaza civilians efficiently?
Firstly, since the implementation of halting the delivery of the aid for more than 2 months, and a very hard starvation policy by Israel and the mounting international condemnation, along with Egypt's pressure against the occupied side, showed that there is a real failure and fiasco to the system of the GHF institution. And in addition to sustaining killing the civilians while they are seeking the humanitarian aid, so Egypt's effort prompted to allow the delivery of the humanitarian aid from Rafah crossing to the second side of the crossing in Karma Abu Salam, due to the Palestinian Rafah crossing was bombed by the occupation army. In addition, they prevent for the vehicles to use it to directly deliver the humanitarian aid, and in addition to the new transaction by the occupation forces, so the aids go through the crossing of Karam Abu Salam despite the restraints, but along with the Egyptians' effort succeeded to mitigate the starvation and the pains suffered by the Palestinian people. There is a great consensus by the international humanitarian institution and the working operated by UNRWA and others not to deal with the GHF. So, the Egyptian determination was imposed to deliver the humanitarian aid along with the international institution that mitigate and elevate the starvation weapons by Israel against the Palestinian, and Egypt is working strongly. I do not wish to say on daily basis to facilitate and remove the obstacles by the occupation forces in the Gaza Strip, despite the very dangerous circumstances that the drivers might face in delivering the aid into the Palestinian side of the Strip.
Mm-hmm. So how significant is Egypt's coordination with international partners such as the UK and securing humanitarian access and a ceasefire?
Certainly, international community had endorsed that largely to the Palestinian cause lately, following the role of Egypt to pave the way before the international community, exposing the horrors suffered by the defenseless civilian Palestinian under the Israel pretext in fighting Hamas. This matter, in addition to the French president's visit to Egypt approaching the crossing, in addition to his visit to the injured, the Palestinian injured, there was an idea amended by the European countries, joined by UK, France and Canada, and the Prime Minister of Australia is floating or considering the recognition of the Palestinian statehood and the two-state solution. All the efforts, international pressure wouldn't be have resulted that way without the Egyptian efforts and the great support and endorsement by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to the Palestinian cause.
So, from Cairo, that was managing editor of Al Ahram, Mr. Mohammed Azzeddine. Thank you so much for joining us here on Q News. Well, this concludes our special coverage. I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok. Q News EG to stay informed. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.